In today's class, we learn about exceptions and what are exceptions, what are different kinds of exceptions, why do exceptions occur, and how do we handle the exceptions. So, one thing that you might have realized, whenever we run a program, and not every time our program runs fine, right? Sometimes there would be compilation errors, sometimes there would be logical errors, sometimes there would be syntax errors. So let's see for what are the different types of errors that we have talked about, right? So I told you three types of errors. So one was syntax error, or you would say compile time error. Then we have logical errors, and then we have runtime errors. Okay. So what does it mean? Syntax error means every language has certain guidelines in which the program needs to be written, right? Like even if it's English or any other language, there are certain rules, right? So the programming language, since it is interpreted by a computer which only understands logic, there is either 0 or 1. So the program has to be written in a specific way. If it's not written in a specific way, it won't be able to produce the right result. It won't be able to compile. So what compilation means, we are converting the source program, that is a program written in high level language, to machine code, which is understood by your machine, right? So that is called compilation. So syntax errors are basically compile time error. For example, in Eclipse, if you write anything, which is not allowed in, let's say I remove this semicolon. Okay, so if you see this red line, that means it is a syntax error, because it's a guideline defined by the Java that every statement needs to be end by a semicolon, right? So these are the rules or the compile time error. So unless and until all the compilation errors are removed, you cannot run that program, right? So this is called syntax errors. What are logical errors? Logical errors means, let's say I'm trying to write a program which adds X and Y, right? My program, I'm writing some code here, right? I'm writing B is equal to X plus Y. So this is my logic, right? But instead of plus, I write in minus. So is it going to, although X minus Y, it's perfectly fine syntax, right? I can write any operator between two integers, but it is not going to give me the intended result. So this type of error is called logical error, and this is the more serious error, because what we want to do, what we want to achieve by writing a program, that hasn't been achieved by those lines. So, and this is hardest to detect. This one logical error is really hard to detect, because the person who is writing the code, he should have that application logic with him. If the program wants to you to do addition of two numbers, or probably, let's say, program wants you to do, find out prime numbers, then the programmer needs to know the logic, how it is working, and whether this is what he wants. So this is the really hard error to detect, because even your programmer or your compiler will not throw any kind of indication that there is a logical error in the program. Okay. Then there is something called runtime errors. What are runtime errors? Runtime errors is like those of errors when you run a program. Run a program, when can you run a program? You can run only a program which is compiled properly. So if it doesn't have any syntax error, that means it can be compiled properly and it can be run. When you run a program, let's say I run a program and the result is not coming. For example, let me run some program. I'm trying to run this program, and here let's say instead of 2 I'm typing here -2. Okay, so the index of syntactically, the index of an array has to be an integer. So this is syntactically fine. There is no compilation error. But when I run this, it gives me an error. Say exception in thread main, array index out of bound exception. So what is this? In Java, Java tells you that there is some error. There are some error conditions in your program which is not allowing your program to run in a proper way. So it also tells you it creates an object of class exception. So class exception is a class which tells you what kind of error is there in your program. So there are predefined errors or classes. For example, here I gave a negative index, right? So it throws me an exception, java.lang.array index out of bounds exception. So this is another class which defines this kind of an error, and it also gives a brief message, say -2. So it tells me that this is the error, so please correct it immediately, otherwise your program will not run properly. So what are exceptions? So exception is a way of telling the program that there is some error. It is basically an object created by a Java virtual machine which defines the kind of error the program is having at what particular line and how it is being thrown. Okay. So if you there are lots of exceptions which are already defined. So as I have told you, exception is nothing but a class. So there are lots of subclasses. So we'll see exception class in Java. If you see, there are so many subclasses which are defined. These subclasses are basically nothing but different kinds of exceptions which are defined in Java. Right, so we have bad string operation exception. The most popular exception, if you will be actually dealing with a lot of arrays, so you can say array index not found, IO exception is there. Then we have illegal class format, class not found exception, that is also very common. We have a SQL exception. You would be doing SQL exception also. Yeah, there are some other illegal argument exception is also there, right? So these are the various exceptions. So sometimes in interviews also they ask you like what are the various exceptions that you have been handled. So what happens, like whenever you sometimes like it is beyond the scope of programmer, like he cannot foresee various kind of errors. So when the program is run, the it might throw some exception. Once the exception throws, the program halts. For example, if I write here something, say hello, and before this, so let me just try to run this again. Okay, so when you see this, your program is basically halted at this line. It doesn't go further. right? It doesn't execute anything which is beyond this because here is an exception and it ends. So what happens, let's say this is a web application. So your Whitebox QA is a web application. So just assume that the written in Java. So you even after a lot of QA, probably there would be some errors or something, some logical errors, some runtime errors. So you need to handle those errors. For example, let's say I change the email and my program crashes, right? So when my program crashes, it doesn't look nice to hear, like when you see the exception and everything. You need to handle that exception. So a lot of times when you know go to a particular website, let's say I go to new tours and this I click on destination, right? So this basically inside there is no logic related to this destination. Probably might have crashed or something. Every time it crashes or there is some error, the page comes up like it is under construction, it is sorry for inconvenience or anything. So this happens with lots of websites. Sometimes it is down. So you just cannot leave it like that. You need to handle those exceptions which might occur, right? So there are different ways of handling the exceptions, and depending upon what kind of exceptions are there, the ways are different, and you can define your own exceptions as well. Okay. So what does exception actually means? It's basically a mild error condition that your program encounters. So what could be those conditions? Like let's say I'm trying to open a file. I have this file. .docx or .txt. I'm trying to open this file. I have written some, a small program here to open the file. I would give the file path here, and I'm trying to open. Probably that file path does not exist, or that file does not exist, or the file, there is some discrepancy in the file name. So your program would, terminate abruptly. It will throw an exception, that file not found exception, that particular file is not found, right? Then if there is some network connection, so maybe when you are doing socket programming, like when you are creating connections between two systems, so you need to open a stream, or I would say a connection between one machine to another machine. If it is disrupted, like your program should be able to, analyze that, okay, this is the issue, and appropriate message needs to be sent to the log files or probably on the screen. So it depends on you how you want to handle that exception. Or let's say operands being manipulated are out of prescribed ranges. Like we have maximum integer value, we have maximum double, minimum double. So when you are trying to do certain operation, let's say I multiply integer max with integer max and I'm trying to put it into another integer. So probably the answer won't be the same. So it might throw an exception. Or you are trying to load a file. For example, let's say if you want to uh, there is a, let's say you want to create a connection with the database. You are writing a Java program and you want to connect it with the database. So you need to load the Oracle driver in the memory. To load the Oracle driver, you need a particular jar file, right? So let's say while running that program, that jar file is missing. That means the class is not loaded in the memory. So class not found exception would be thrown. That particular class, or you can say dot class file, is not found. So there can be various reasons of throwing the exceptions. So these exceptions can be handled in the sense that they can be caught because they are all objects, right? So if we know that this particular code is can throw this kind of an exception, then probably we can write another code to handle those exceptions. So we'll see how to catch those. We call it catching the exception. Catching the exception means handling that exception in our own way, right? Then there are errors. As we have said, exception are mild error conditions which can be handled by the program. So exceptions are error conditions which can be handled by a program. But there could be some errors. There could be some errors which are beyond the scope of the program. For example, let's say you're trying to read a file, but there is some hardware malfunctioning of your hard disk, right? So your program cannot handle it because it is beyond the scope. It is the, you can say, malfunctioning of an hardware which cannot be handled by software, right? So you can say there is hardware malfunctioning. Now let's say you are trying to run a program. So this is one way which cannot be handled by your program logic. Another thing is like, let's say you are running a Java program and your memory is being utilized. There are so many programs which are running. So your Java program needs more memory and your system is not providing it. So there is out of memory error, right? So out of memory error, let's say if I'm trying to run an infinite loop, I'm creating n number of objects which are eating up memory, all their memory in JVM it is eating up, right? So my system would be short of memory. It has a fixed memory. I'm talking about RAM, not about the secondary storage device. So this memory which I'm talking about, this memory. Right. So if you see here, my Java program is taking 343 MB of the memory. So let's say there are lots of programs running and it needs more memory and your program cannot handle it simply, right? It is beyond the scope. So you cannot write anything in your program to handle these kind of situations. And these are called errors in Java. So exceptions are conditions which can be handled. Errors are conditions which are beyond the scope of the program, right? So both exception and errors are classes. Exception and error are classes and their parent class is throwable. So exceptional errors are basically the subclasses of throwable class. So whenever an error or an exception occurs, an object is created and an object in the memory is created which contains the information of what happened. So it is that object is basically used by JVM to do the follow-up process, what it wants to do, right? And it can be used if it is an exception, that object can be used to handle those kind of particular exception, right? So let's try to create certain exceptions. So we have seen an array. So let's create a class. So I'm just writing bad array. And I'm here I'm creating an array. Okay. So I'm trying to print, let's say there are 3, right? So let's say I'm trying to print 3. So the index actually for this particular array ranges from 0 to 2, 0, 1 and 2. When I am trying to print an array, so let's create a class for this. Always create a separate test class. And here in this class, let's call this method. Exception examples. So I need to call the method. So I'll call bad array. So it gave me array index out of bound exception. So let's try to analyze what it is doing. So if you see here, there are 2 lines before this. So starting, we always read the kind of exception from the bottom, because my entry point to the program is from the main. So when program starts from here, right? So it creates the object of this class, and then it calls that bad array. So when the exception is thrown, so exception is there in the exception class particular method. So my program enters through main test exception examples. You can see here 12. 12 means the 12th line in this particular class. So you can click this. When you click this, it tells me this is highlighted. So there is something wrong with this particular method. Then if you see the above line, it says you can click in this line. After calling from this, it is calling basically a bad array, which is there in exceptions example. So in the brackets, this is the name of the Java file where the exception is occurring. So you can click on that particular file and see where the exact error is occurring, right? So here, let's say I want to, I'm calling another method. So let's do one thing, create another method. And give this name as some method. And this method is calling bad array. So instead of calling it directly, what I am trying to do, x dot some method. Now run this and we'll see the stack. This is called the stack. Stack means basically it's an data structure just like arrays, and it is called last in first out. That means it creates a layer of how the exception, how the flow of the control is passing from one program, one method to another method. So your entry point is main. So your main is called, and then it calls some method. So if you see here, always start reading the stack from bottom. Your main called. This is the exception line where the exception occurs. Then it called some method. So this is the line where the exception occurred. Then go up in the same Java file. This is actual the line, and then at this line, java.lang, and if you see there is a message 3. So there is something wrong with 3. So I need to change this 3 to something to handle this particular exception, right? So as a Java programmer, your primary responsibility, especially as a QA engineer, you need to know, you need to read the exception and try to figure out in which class the exception is occurring, right? So tomorrow you might, when you go for an interview, you might be given some kind of this exception stack, and probably you would be asked to locate the line where the exact exception is occurring, right? So you need to read it from the bottom and see the name of the file, because here there are just 2-3 files. Probably in real time world there would be 20 files. So you have to locate, and one file probably is calling another method, and that method is calling a method in another Java file. So right, so you have to locate the exact location where the exception is occurring, and then probably you would be taking some steps to handle that exception, right? So this is example of one exception. Then there another exception which is very common is the null pointer exception. So this is um, array index out of bounds, out of bounds exception. Then there is another very popular exception which comes is null pointer exception. So let's try to create a program that string. So I'm writing str dot length. Okay, so let's call this if you see here, it throws an exception, java.lang null pointer exception. What does that mean? Let me explain this. A lot of times you will see this exception, null pointer exception. So if you see here, while writing this particular statement, what has happened? It has created an object reference on the stack with the name str, but it hasn't created the object, right? Because this is null, it is initialized as null. That means there is nothing created in the heap which is referred by str, and I'm trying to call str.length. Length is basically a method which is defined on the object, but the object is not created. That is the reason it is throwing an exception, because I'm trying to access something which is not being created, right? So any you can say any activity on a null reference. Null reference means a reference which holds null, which is not pointing to any object, is going to give me a null pointer exception. So this is a very common exception while you are writing your program, right? So there are actually some very common exceptions. They are arithmetic exceptions. It's like let's create an arithmetic exception. Sometimes you are trying to do a mathematical operation which is bad maths, I would say. what I'm doing, I'm actually trying to find the square root of a negative number. So let's try to run this. Okay, it actually doesn't throw the exception. It says not a number. NaN is basically a keyword which says NaN, so let's not a number. So let's say let's do some other exception. Oh yeah, division by 0. Yeah, let's divide by 0. Yeah, that we can do. Yeah, this time it says java.lang arithmetic exception division by 0. So it gives you a brief message, and it also tells you and what lines in what classes the exception has been uh, propagated. So this is another example of exception. This is the arithmetic exception. Then we have illegal argument exception. So you might be asked sometimes to write a program which produces a particular kind of exception. You can say, so you don't have to actually memorize this. As you write more programs, you will come up with different kinds of exceptions. Then, then we have actually SQL exception and IO exception also. So let's try to create an IO exception. IO exception is input output exception. Let's say when you are dealing with files. So let's try to read something from a file. Bad IO. So I'm creating a file object. I have to import this. Okay. And my file dot, let's say create new file. Okay. Now let's call this. Okay, if you see there, it throws the java.io exception. It says the system cannot find the path specified. The system cannot find the path specified because if you see the stack for it started with main, then it called bad IO, right? And in here, if you see, there are two other things like create new file. Basically, it throws the exception when it tried to call create new file method, because this method is basically defined in the java.io file package, and this method is trying to create a new file at that particular location, but that particular location does not exist on my system. So that's the reason it is an error and it needs to be handled. So if you see here, I did something different which was not present in previous exception. I wrote this line throws exception, and here also I wrote this line IO exception. So if I don't write this line, let me just remove this. There is some syntax error which is coming up. It says unhandled exception type IO exception, add throws declaration or surround with try catch. What does this mean? To understand this, let me explain you. There are two types of exception. There are two types of exception. First category is unchecked exception. Then the second is checked exception. What is unchecked exception and what is checked exception? Unchecked exception are also called runtime exception, and checked exception are also called compile time exception. Runtime exception are those exceptions that where the compiler does not complain about the logic, right? Here when I'm writing 34/0, it is syntactically perfectly fine, right? Compiler does not complain. It is basically the you can say it is the bad logic by the programmer, which is who is writing this program, right? So a runtime exception occurs due to programming errors and needs to be handled by the programmer itself. The compiler does not prompt for this exception, right? But there are certain exceptions called checked exception, like IO exception or SQL exception and class not found exception. So what are checked exception? For these kind of exception, the compiler would prompt the programmer to handle the exception. Like it says that these kind of exceptions are generally due to these exceptions are generally due to bad input. Bad input means let's say I'm writing a SQL query. So generally you would be writing some code for SQL query, like you will be creating a statement object and you would be writing something like con.create statement and then you would be creating execute query, and here you would be writing some select query. So select star from employees, right? So in case you put some syntax error in the SQL logic, let's say instead of employees, I just remove E. So this table does not exist, right? But this is a part of the string, so your Java program will not complain here. But what would happen? It assumes that these kind of exceptions are from bad input. This is a bad input. So it prompts you that SQL exception, there could be a bad input, IO exception, there could not be a file, class not found exception, there could not be a class that could not be found. So these are exceptions which are predefined, right? In the sense like it's not the programming logic, there is nothing wrong with the logic, but the input, this is the input. The file is not found, that file is basically was the input. So whenever you're writing those kind of code, it prompts you, here it is prompting me that either add throws declaration or surround with try catch. So it says surround with try catch. So try is basically a block of code wherein you are expecting some kind of exception like this. So I can write a try block, try and catch. And what kind of exception I'm expecting? Since this is a file IO, I'm expecting a file IO exception. So I would say IO exception. I'll create an object because it's a class. And then here in this catch, I would handle the exception. So let's handle this exception. Whenever this particular file is not there, I want to write my own message. This path is not defined. Please enter a valid file path. Right? Now let's call this. So it instead of throwing the exception, actually producing a logic, or you can say producing a message saying this path is not defined, please enter a valid path. So when you are writing thousands lines of code, there could be where this kind of error or this kind of exception is you are expecting. You don't want to end your program then and there. You want to continue with that program. So let's say that after this logic, I am writing some statement. So if you see here, the exception has been handled and the program continues to the next step. If I don't handle that exception, if I simply write here in my this sample, I don't handle the exception. I remove the try catch block. Let me remove the try catch block. And I write here throws IO exception. So it's definitely going to throw, this going to throw the exception to the calling program, which is the main program, and the main program also I have to throw the exception because I'm not handling the exception. So what I'm saying, I don't want to handle this exception here. So I'm throwing it to the calling program, and what is the calling program? My main is the calling program. So I have this option. Either I write try catch block, I handle this here, or again I throw it. That means I don't want to handle it. So now if I try to run this, the exception comes and my program is halted. This line is not printed. That means I cannot go further in the program. But that's not something which I want to do, right? When I'm running an application, I don't want to halt on just one single exception. I want to continue. Probably I want to log that error in a file. So what I can write instead of there must be some log file or something where I would be writing this, that the error occurs at this place. And so there would be, for every application, you would be creating some kind of log files where you would be writing all your errors, right? Or all your exception errors, or there you can write your own customized messages also. Okay. So to handle the exception, we use try catch finally block. So we have seen how to use the try catch. So we can for checked exception, this is mandatory. Either so for checked exception, the try catch block or throws is mandatory, right? So either you handle the exception or you throw the exception to the calling method. So that's what we did. Here we are throwing the exception to the calling method using throws clause. So in main, I have a choice. Either I throws the exception or I handle it. So if I remove this, again it is gonna give me two options: add throws declaration or surround with catch, try catch. So I can surround it with try catch block. Okay, and here I can write my own customized message. Some exception in bad IO. So now again, since I have handled the program, handled this exception, the program still continues. The program continues, right? So it goes to the next line and the next line and the next line. So this is an advantage of putting your code in try. So you will be writing your code. So most of the time, maybe all of the time, you would be putting your code into try block. So try block means the code on which you want to handle the exception, right? The code which is outside the try block will not be handled. So this code, if this code is outside the try block, this will not be handled. Only one which is inside the try block. So let's say that this particular method is returning a string, and I'm saying str is equal to null. And instead of create, let's say it is reading some data from the file and putting into a string, which is not happening because this file does not exist or something like that. And I'm returning return str, right? So in my main program, it's the programmer's duty. When I'm calling this particular method, it is returning a string. Str is equal to, right? And now I'm trying to print this string, the length of the string. It has to be outside. Again, it's going to throw an exception, right?
It should.
So, as I have said, everything needs to be in try catch. Again, it's going to throw an exception.
If you are expecting again the exception, you will again need to try your catch or just.
No. Now I'm trying. Let's run this. Again, it's going to throw the exception. So I have to put this again into a try catch block.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So if I put this again in try catch, okay, and now I am expecting this as a null pointer exception, right? So I can add another catch statement. I can add here catch null pointer exception, and here I would say this out string is null. Handle this, okay? Or the program continues without string. So I'm just giving an example. It depends on what you want to do.
Yes. Is there a way that any exception that belongs to that file goes to the same try and catch?
Yeah, it is going to the same try. This is the same try block, right? So let's run this. Yeah, it is actually caught here only. Here is what is happening. Let me just change this. It is actually caught here, so it is not coming here. So let me just change this program some way like so that it doesn't throw the exception in the first. So in exception, what happens? Only at a time, only one catch block is executed. It doesn't execute two. So if the exception is coming at this statement only, the exception was coming is in this statement only. So this was only thrown back. Are you getting me?
No, not this portion.
Okay. So previously the first line was executed. str is equal to ex dot bad io. So it goes here. Previously it was C training ABC. So it couldn't find that file. In my create new file, throw an exception. When an exception is thrown,
there is
no exception is thrown, right?
Yeah.
Exception is thrown. If it is training, exception would be thrown, right? So that exception is thrown and to the main program, and it is caught here. IO exception, right? It was an IO exception.
With some exception.
Yeah, so I wrote some exception in bad IO. So this was continued. So once one exception is handled, it never goes to another catch block, right? What I'm trying to say, no matter how many catch blocks you are writing, so in your program, in try, there could be a null pointer exception also, there could be an IO exception, there could be an array index of bound. So only the first line which is creating the exception, that would be caught and handled, and it will exit the try catch block. The next catch block will not, because that next line is never executed. The system never reached this line. Okay.
There is no ABC, so there is no point of catching.
No, the system never reached this line because the error thrown, the exception was thrown at this line, so next line was never executed, right? Whenever you are,
but we handled that.
We handled doesn't mean that the program will continue in the try block. It will continue after the try block. It will not continue here. This line would never be executed.
It is totally coming out of the loop, and
yes, this would not be executed. See, this line is not executed because there was an error here. There was an exception here. After the exception, anything after that statement in the try block will not be executed. After this statement, the catch block would be executed if the matching exception is there, right? So this some exception in bad IO is executed, and after this, it comes out of the try catch block, and the next line after the try catch block would be executed. Okay, so let's do one thing. So let's try to change this program, and instead of this, I'm just writing C. C drive exists, so it is gonna create a new file. Okay, so here there won't be any exception. Now it is returning the str, which is a null value, and what I'm trying to do, I am trying to print the length. Length, right? So again, it's going to throw an exception which we have caught. So let's run this. Again, it's gonna some exception in bad IO.
It should avoid the first catch and come to the second one, right?
No. It should not actually. It is actually throwing some exception. Let me see what it is throwing. So to find what exception is throwing, cabc.txt. So what we have to do, we can print the stack trace. So I want to print the stack trace here. Stack trace means again the trace which was coming before, but now it is not. It is actually I'm just printing it. Okay, the access is denied. Okay, C is basically it won't allow me to create a file in C. So let me create a file in something else. And you have to always give a double slash because single slash actually has a different meaning. Slash T is a tab, so you need to give double slash to denote that this is basically a slash and not a special character.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's run this. Okay, if you see here now, there was no exception in that IO, right? So if there is no exception, it came out here. It came here. So this line is executed. This will not be executed. And when I tried to return the length because the str was null, right? It throws the exception which was caught here, null pointer exception. String is null, handle this. So program continues without string, right?
The second catch has the exception.
Yeah. Now the second catch is actually executed. The first is not.
Yeah.
Because whatever exception it is coming here, it will never go to the next line. The program is halted in the try block, but after the try block, it is gonna continue. Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is, since we can always try with one try, we can have multiple catches because every statement might throw a different kind of exception. If we don't know what kind of exception, then it's always a good practice to put a catch exception, which is a super class of all these exceptions, right? So, but we need to, whatever the broader category, we need to put it down because we need to first catch the specific exception. If it is not there, then it's gonna come here. For example, if I'm trying to write a method here, let's say I'm creating an array. Okay, and I'm trying to print array minus this, right? So here there is no matching. I can write here some exception. And let me just comment this. So if I don't comment this, it's gonna catch the null pointer exception. Some exception, program continues, because here what happened, there was no error, no exception in this line. There was no error in this line. Now when there was an exception in this line, it could not find the matching exception. And then it came to this one, exception E. Had it been another exception, had I even, let's say I put a array index out of bound exception after this. Okay, then what happens?
Okay, in that case, it will not come to this arrays exception.
What happens? Okay, it says unreachable catch block. It's not even compiling because I'm writing it out after this. This will never be executed, which is a compile time error, right? So if I write it here, then it is gonna execute. So my code will never reach there if I am trying to put a broader category of exception at the in the first place. It is not going to compile. So I have to actually write all the exceptions which I am expecting and then the broadest category, which is the exception class at the end. Okay. For example, like IO exception, and then we have a file not found exception also. So if I handled file not found exception, it would have never come to this IO exception, which is a broader category, right? So now if I try to run this, let's say I'm trying to run this with users 1. So it's going to throw me this exception. The system cannot find the path. So, okay, it doesn't find, okay. That particular exception was not thrown, it throws IO exception. File not found is not, okay, because it was actually created in new file. Right, so maybe when you're doing some file read operation, then probably it throws file not found exception. Here it is throwing just IO. You can change the code here actually. And don't be scared by these APIs. We will be doing it, these APIs very soon. Now if you see, it has caught this exception file not found because when I'm trying to read it from that file, the file could not be found, so it was caught here file not found exception. So it didn't go to IO exception because this is a broader category. This is the exception which exactly matched. So whenever, as I've mentioned, only one catch block would be executed, even if there are 5 catch blocks. Here, if you see here in the same code, there in the try code, there are 1 catch, 2, 3 and 4 and 5. There are 5 catch blocks for one try, right? So for any, there could be any exception in my code. First, the closest match is seen. If that particular exception is not there, then the broader category. So if file not found would not be there, then IO exception would have been executed. Then if IO exception is not handled, then exception would be there, right? And sometimes, people don't even write anything here. So they just write catch exception E and just leave it like this, which is not a good programming practice. You should print some message or put it in a log file or something. Yeah, Sujaya is saying, isn't it easy to just put exception instead of going to all its subclasses? Sujaya, sometimes or a lot of times programmers do write this, like just putting a broader class, but in that you may not be able to track or handle the individual exceptions. For example, if I just remove everything and put it into exception, then I won't be able to know like what exception happened, right? I have to print the stack trace, and I won't be able to handle it individually. Like for null pointer exception, I might be giving some value to this. Maybe I'm giving some integer, some string value to this. Maybe I'm writing str is equal to something, right? So here I'm handling it in some way, right? So, but if I just put it a common thing, I don't know what went wrong with my code, and I will not be able to do, to rectify or correct that particular code to handle that individual exception. That's the reason we always try to um, catch the specific one, and in case it is not there, then if sometimes programmer cannot visualize that okay, this kind of exception could be there, then we put the general exception. Then you would tomorrow when you would be writing test scripts, right? So you would be matching, let's say on this particular page, google.com, right? You are writing a test code. You are writing 5 assertions. Assertions means you are validating like that the page has you plus search, images, mail, drive. It has all these links. So for all these matching expected plus actual, you would be writing some assertion codes, right? So if U is not there, do you want to end the test? You don't want to end the test. Probably you will look for search. So here you would be actually using try and catch. So if this is not there, you will catch the exception, log the error, and then move on to the next step, right? If it is also not there, then move on to the next step. These are called soft assertions. Soft assertion means you are verifying that it is there, but you are not stopping the test to go further. It is not that important. But let's say you are trying to reach to a particular page, and that page title is not matching. That means that the page itself is not there. Then probably that's a hard assertion. You don't want to continue the test, your program after that. Then you would log in that detail and you would end your test then and there itself. Those are called hard assertions. So we'll do in WebDriver how to do soft assertions and hard assertions. So we have seen like with one try we can have multiple catch. Then there is another block which is called finally block. Finally block is a block which is always executed whether there is an exception or not. So generally in finally block we do write cleanup processes, cleanup statements. This is always executed. Okay. So let's run this. See here, this is always executed. Even if there is exception or not. So if let's say I'm just removing all exceptions. So I'm trying to do something like this so that there are no exceptions. So here I have removed the exception. Here this line is not executed, and I'm here printing add.length. So there is no exception expected. Then also if you see, this is always executed. So finally block is the block which is always executed whether or not there is an exception or not. So why do we use the finally block? So sometimes let's say you are opening the files. Here if you see, we generally what happens, like we open a file to read and then we need to close the file handle. So when we need to close the file, let's say I want to close this particular file, right? So if there's an exception, then that file dot close. So if I'm writing here fr dot close, this would never be reached, right? If it is there is an exception here, this would be never be reached, and when this never be reached, this particular object would be would provide memory leak, would be a cause of memory leak, because all the handles, file handles need to be closed. So generally what happens, this kind of a statement we put it in finally block. So the right way of writing this particular code would be try, and here you would be writing catch. Here you would be writing file not found exception. So that's a specific exception. And then you would be writing the broader category, which is IO exception. And then you would be writing here catch exception. Okay. And here if you see, if you want to do something, so here the fr dot close should be there in finally block. Finally fr dot close. And this all the since you need to use these fr dot close in the finally block, but it is defined within the try, so you need to define it outside try. So what I'll do, I'll just cut it and put it here, and I'll initialize inside, but I'll declare it outside. Similarly for this string also, I'll declare it outside. Okay, so that I can access it in finally. fr dot close, right? Now when I'm writing fr dot close, I have to ensure that fr is not null. So I would write something like if fr is not equal to null, then fr dot close. Okay. Now my next question is, in this try, let's say there is a return statement. So if you have used try catch, there is no need to throw the exception because you have already handled it here. So there is a return statement, return str. Okay, and there is a return statement here, and there is a return statement here. So let's do one thing. So instead of this, let's say I am in try. I am in catch. I am outside. And I need to actually put try and catch for, because it is a checked exception. And here actually it would never reach because I've already written a return statement in finally. So yeah. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to this fr dot close, it's checked exception. This also, say if you see the definition of this, it says it throws IO exception. So whenever any method throws any exception, it is always mentioned in the Java doc which is created, and you can handle that exception there. So you can go to, you can see any of the exceptions, like any of the methods defined in a particular class, and see what exception it is throwing, and you can catch that exception. So fr.close is throwing the exception. That's the reason it is, I'm trying to write it here like this. Okay. And okay, so let's try to run this. Let's see which return is executed. Either this return is executed or the other one. So we don't have to actually handle this because this has been handled already, and you can sys out str. Okay, so what I'm doing, I'm calling the method. It is returning an string, and I'm printing the string. And let me just comment these two also. This is not required. Okay, and let's run this. So it says I am in catch. So that means there is some error which has been, some exception which has been thrown. And if you see this return has not been executed, this return has been executed. Okay, this is finally, so this return has been executed. So either if this is an interview question, if you have a return statement in try and you have a return statement in finally, which return statement will be executed? Although everything here executed nicely, but instead of returning from try, the program returns from finally, right? There is only one situation where finally is not executed. Finally is always executed. If you see here, there is some warning also given here. So it's a bad statement. Bad statement to write return in try block. Okay, so you should never write return in try block. Okay, all these kind of questions are generally asked in interviews. Like, can we put a return statement in try block? If there are two return statements, which would be executed? Can we have multiple finally? So can we have multiple finally block? So this gives me an in error. We can have just one finally block. We can have with one try, we can have multiple catches, but one finally. Okay. So this is another interview question. Can we have a try without catch? Can we have a try block without catch? Yes, we can have try without catch. Either try should have finally or it should have catch or both. So a try with catch works, a try with catch and finally works, a try with multiple catch and finally works, and a try with only finally works. That also works. Okay. So these are the combinations. Yes, a try without catch is possible. Now, so we have seen that there are two types of exceptions. One is checked exception, one is unchecked exception. Unchecked exceptions means the exceptions like null pointer and all those kind of exceptions. where compiler does not complain about try and catch, and basically these exceptions are because of the programming logical errors by the program. And if you want, if a programmer feels like, he can also include a try catch here. So instead of writing, I can put this into a try catch block, and I can write a try catch block here. So I can write null pointer exception, and I can give various methods. So this is an exception object which is created and it has certain methods. So let's see what are the various important methods. One is get cause. Get cause is basically gives you the cause, so it actually gives the stack trace. You can print the stack trace, like get message is gives you the message which comes with the exception. So one get message is important, and then the other is dot print stack trace. So this is the same trace which is printed when the exception is thrown. So all these three lines, like from where the exception starts, where did it go, and what line and what message, everything is there in print dot stack trace. So these are the two important methods which would be used. Apart from this, as we have seen, there are compile time exception and there are runtime exception. So a lot of times you would be asked, like, give just some examples of compile time. So you would be writing IO exception, SQL exception, file not found exception. Okay, these kind of exception you would be writing. And runtime exception you would be writing like array index out of bounds, illegal argument exception, null pointer exception. Okay, so these are runtime exceptions. We can create our own exceptions. Okay, like these exception is a class, right? So I can write my own exception class. So I can create a compile time exception also. I can create a runtime exception also. If I create a compile time exception, then I have to extend it by exception class. If I have to create a runtime exception, then I have to extend it by runtime exception, which is basically a subclass of exception. So you can see the hierarchy of exception. You see here at the top of the parent of all the exceptions is throwable class, which has two, error and exception. So error is basically virtual machine error, AWT, stack overflow, out of memory. All these errors are serious errors which are beyond the scope of program. Your program cannot handle these errors. Then we have exceptions. These are mild error conditions which can be handled by the program. So we have subclasses like runtime exception, IO exception. Then we have end of file exception, file not found, arithmetic, index out of bounds. So these are the exceptions, runtime, and these are compile time. And here we have SQL exception also. And I can write my own exception. So we'll see how to create our own exceptions. Yeah, Tripti. Tripti is asking what will happen if the return is outside try finally. if there is already a return in finally, then it would say that the code is not reachable, just like this. But if it is, if there is no return here, then it's gonna run. So this is gonna return I am outside. So this is going to be printed. Right? So let's see how to write your own exceptions. So tomorrow, like in interviews, they would ask, did you write any of your own exceptions? So probably yes. Let's say that if you are testing this a particular website, let's say you want to test GoToMeeting, right? So for every website, you want to write your own exceptions for, let's say, bad URL. So if the URL you are passing is not correct, so you want to throw an exception bad URL, or you can say title not matching, you can write, or you can say header text not displayed. So you can write all these kind of customized exception for your class. So you can create a class with all these things. You can write code to create your own exceptions. So let's try to create an exception. So if I want to create a, first let's create a checked exception. So checked exception, as I have told you, it needs to be extended by exception class. So compile time is checked exception. What is checked exception means? If I don't use try catch, it is the compiler will throw an error, like the compiler will complain. It will not compile the program. So let's try to create my own exception. So here I'm writing new class. Let's say my compile time exception. So I'm just giving, or I can say, let's say I'm writing bad URL exception. Okay, and I'm the superclass for this. It's the compile time exception, so it would be exception. So it extends this. So I'm creating a constructor public bad URL exception. And I want to just pass some message here. And a string URL. Okay, so I'll tell you how to throw this. So here I would write here this out. The URL domain name is improper. Okay, so this is one example. There could be other examples also, like here they have created a server time dot exception, like it is passing a message and some port. So this you can create, like let us concentrate on our only. So this is a bad URL exception. So I want to throw this exception if the URL does not end with .com. So what I'm doing, let us call this method. So I'm let's say there is a Let me comment this. So let's say while doing the test, I came up with some URL. So URL is equal to www.whiteboxqa.com. So I'm reading some URL, and if I say if URL dot ends with, if not of this, so if URL does not ends with .com, then throw new and bad URL exception, and the message you can actually give any message. .com not found, and here in bad URL, and just println the message. Okay. And since I'm throwing this exception, I need to, and I'm creating this as a compile time exception. If you see here, bad URL exception is a compile time exception because it is extending exception class. So I need to handle it. So here I have to handle it. I have to surround it with try catch, or I have to throw this. So I'll put it into a try catch block. So I'll say try catch, and what I'm catching bad URL exception E, and print and let's say print some bad URL. Okay. So what I'm doing, I have created my own exception, and I've handled the exception in my own way. So let us try to run this. So here it is .com. So let me just remove it and make it CO so that it doesn't end with .com. And it, if you run this, it says it has caught this exception. It has caught this exception, some bad URL, and then the program continues with this. Okay.
So do you want me to tell something a little bit more, or
No, it's
okay?
fine. It's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now let's see a couple of questions which are there in every interview. In Java interview, there would be at least 1 or 2 exception questions. So we have covered most of the things. So they would be asking what is an exception? How is it different from errors? Okay. What is the superclass of all exceptions? Then they would say, can we have a try without catch? Then what would happen if we have system dot exit in try, then would finally be executed? So if in my program, let's say I'm writing a try catch, So here, let's say in try I write line system.exist. System.exist actually ends your current application. It ends your current application. So do you think it's gonna reach finally? Finally would be executed or not? So in this case, finally will not be executed. Okay. Then can we have multiple catch blocks? Yes, answer is yes. And more specific block, you would more specific exception should be handled first. Okay. Then should try contain return? So answer is no, it should not. It should be there in finally, but not in try. So it's a bad practice to put return in try. Then here I would also like to add that only one catch is always executed. Okay. Then what else? What is the difference between throw and throws? So throw clause actually throws the exception to the calling method. So throws clause throws the exception to the calling method. This is used if you don't want to handle that exception in that method. This is used if you do not want to handle the exception in current method. Okay. So here, like if I don't want to put a try catch block, I would have written here throws, right? I would have written here throws. Okay. And let's say I can actually here put multiple exception also. So I can write here throws IO exception comma exception. So more general would be outside. The more specific would be inside. So if I want to find write file not found exception, that also I can write here, right? So I can so all these three. What does this mean? If it's throwing three exception, all these three exceptions should be handled in the main program. Whatever whatever method has called this particular program, particular method. So 1, 2, 3. So this should be handled where bad math has been called. Okay. So you can throw multiple exceptions. Then what does throw means? Throw clause is used to explicitly throw an exception. Okay. So it's not necessarily, for example, here I can actually use any condition to throw. So for example, I can write here if fr is equal to null, then also I can write throw, I want to throw some exception, throw new file not found exception. Although it actually automatically creates it. Okay, so throw file not found exception. So you are explicitly throwing an exception. You are giving your own condition to throw an exception. You are not waiting for the program to throw the exception. You are explicitly throwing the exception. So that is throw clause. So you can here create your own exception. All you can use throw a predefined exception also. Okay. Then we can create our own exception. So how can you create your own exception? So we can create a subclass from exception to create compile time exception, or we can subclass from subclass from a runtime exception to create runtime exception. So in the above, if I create a class like this, just like bad URL exception, it is extending from exception. In case I write here runtime exception, then I don't have to necessarily put a try catch block when I'm throwing it. So here in this, even if I remove this, it doesn't matter. So I can actually remove this try catch block. Runtime exception. Yeah, P small. Okay. So here if you see, now there is no need of try catch block because now I'm creating a runtime exception, right? So this way I can create my own exception. So next question could be, how did you use exceptions in your test script? Okay, so you can say we used exceptions in making soft assertions. Then soft assertions. What are soft assertions? Where soft assertions are made wherein you don't want to stop the test and continue with the test. We just want to verify. So there is a difference between verify and assert. Verify means you just want to verify even if it's not true. You don't want to end the script. You want to continue to the next line. Just you want to log in the details. So it's kind of a warning kind of thing, not an error. Or so you can say we used to catch the exceptions and log in those details, or we create own exception class for handling common errors on a web page. So just like bad URL exception, I gave you certain examples here, right? Bad URL exception, title not matching, header text not displayed. So these are some common things, or you can say link number of links not matching, link size not matching, right? Or the image size is not matching. All these kind of things you can create. These are just some common things that could be there on any web page. So instead of you can instead of just putting an error, you can throw an exception and log in those exceptions into a file or something. Okay. So if you see here in your Java, where Java is installed, here my Java is installed somewhere in program files. So if you see here JRE, JVM is basically part of this. It includes the libraries and classes. So .dlls are all JVM. So these are dynamic link libraries basically which gets loaded into memory, right? So JVM is part of it. Okay. So JRE contains JVM. Okay, core classes and all the supporting files. And JVM, what is JVM? JVM converts the bytecode into machine. So JRE contains JVM, which actually is the programs, or you can say logic, which converts bytecode into machine specific. So to run the so another question, very important question, which actually sometimes being asked is Java platform independent? Everybody knows Java is platform independent, right? So the next question is JVM or JDK, or you can say, yeah, JVM, I would say platform independent. No, JVM is not platform independent because it is specific to a particular machine. If I have a Windows machine, I need to have to install Windows JVM, right? So I would go and download the JRE specific to my machine. So JVM is not for platform independent, but it makes Java program independent, right? Because bytecodes are platform independent. Okay. So we can set class path for Java by setting following variable. So what is that variable? What is that variable? We can set class path. That is the path variable, not the Java path. By path, we actually set the class path for Java. So once this is the environment variable which is set. Okay. So this is like by when you go to computer, you can set this by system properties, advanced system settings, environment variables. So here if you see path, here if you see C program file Java JDK bin. So your all the files is going to look here in this particular directory. Okay. And let's say Eclipse actually sets all the class path. That's the reason you when you are you have to add some jars, you would say add to build path. So Eclipse automatically set the class path for that particular file for that particular program. So these are the libraries that are added. Okay. So automatically this path is added. So Eclipse does everything. But in case you have to explicitly go and set the class path, that also you can do using this command java/cp or java/class path. So java cp. This is also used to set the class path. Okay, so read about this path and class path. Okay. Then we can compile Java program with following command. So Javac is the utility or the tool, Java tool to compile the program. A dash is a compiled Java program that can be executed by this command. When you compile a Java program, what file is created? Dot class file is created, right? And you can execute it using the Java command. So B is correct. Then arrange the following statement in correct order. What do you do? Running the Java command, main method of that class is executed, JRE is loaded along with the class you specify. What happens first? First, you run the Java command, right? So you run the program, let's say Java ABC. So one comes first, then JRE is loaded, right? So when you run the Java command, JRE is loaded. Then 3. Then the main method of the class is executed. So answer is C. So which of the following data type can store 64? So 64 bit means 8 bytes. So long, only long can store 8. So this is float takes 4 bytes. So this is half correct. Now, which of the following is not a primitive data type? False. This is in double quotes, right? Anything in double quotes becomes a string literal and it becomes an object in a string pool, right? And capital Boolean. Capital Boolean is basically a wrapper class. So B and D are the correct answers. Which command from the JDK should be used to compile the following source code? So this name of the program is small program. So whenever you are typing or to compile, anyway we have to use Java and followed by .java. There has to be a space here. But make sure that the uppercase and lowercase are same. So small program .java. D is the right answer. Here what happens? What is the result? Public class. Instead of public static void main, I have written private. So syntactically this is fine. So there is no compile time error. But when we are trying to run, it gives an error that the signature of main is different. So it has to be public, right? Because private means it cannot be accessed outside. So JVM classes cannot access this particular method. Okay. So when you're trying to run, it will not execute. You have to make it public. So main method should always be public. Okay. So this is the right answer. Okay. So this is int a is equal to 5, b is equal to plus a. So this is a pre-increment operator. So b is now 6, right? So a is equal to, it's gonna print 6 and b is also 6 here. And b is equal to 6, but the value of b after the next line would be 7, but printed should be 6. So answer is C. Okay, so we have slash n here. So slash n is basically a new line character. So slash always backslash gives us special meaning to this particular character. So this becomes a new line. So we have form feed, carriage return, new line. So there are tab. So this is C is going to be the right answer. So the test was pretty easy actually. The next test would be on arrays and strings. So please start working on arrays and strings, and probably I would include exceptions as well. So J, K, L, K is equal to L plus plus. So K is still 0 and L is 1. So J is now 1 and K is also 1. And I is equal to J plus plus. So I is equal to 0. J is equal to plus plus K. Okay, K is 1. Okay, it has to be 1 then. B is the right answer. Okay, then what gets printed? Okay, so here what happens? In x is equal to 0, if x is equal to 1. So x is not equal to 0, so this is not executed. It is 0, so first it goes here and this is not matching, so it goes here. So system.out.println 0 would be executed, and after 0 there is no break here, so it doesn't come out of this block. It actually goes to this particular statement also. So 0 and 2 both would be printed. This is also fine. Int x is equal to 0, so this is false. X is equal to 0, so it goes to else. Z is equal to 1. Then if y, this is 2, z becomes 2. So z becomes 2. The program is prints 2. If statement, there is a problem in this statement. If x, else, if y. Yeah, there is a problem within statement. No, there is no problem with this if statement. If statement is perfectly fine. So z is basically 2. This is not correct. In Srivali, there is no then in Java. You don't write then in Java. If else is there only. Okay, what will it count? Since the counter is in reverse order, 4 count is greater than 1. So 4, 3, 2. For equal to 1, it's going to come out. So only 4, 3, 2. So answer is 3. This is fine. Then program to print all numbers, all even numbers between 100 and 200. Okay, so plus equal to 2. Yeah, this is perfectly fine.